All right, quiet on the set. Lights, camera, action. And no, you're not. Well, I guess you are the star of the show. Anyway, that's what you have to do when you work with an Airedale who's a movie star. But anyway, let's talk about which knife is best. But of course, the answer is there is no such thing as a best knife, just like there is no such thing as a best trap. It all depends on who you are, what you're using it for, and where you're using it. Now, these three knives right here are very similar in size, but there are some significant differences between them. And I'm just going to go through what I use for what and what I think about them. The top one here is probably my favorite at the current time. The Junior Woodsman. This is a wonderful, wonderful skinning knife. I just got back from a trip to Arkansas where I did some hog and beaver snaring. I did a job over there, and I tell you, if you've ever skinned a hog, you know that a hog is a challenge. It's not only a challenge to the person doing the skinning, but it's a challenge to the knife. This thing went through those hogs like a hot knife through butter, and it held its edge remarkably well. I was super, super impressed with this blade. The first thing you'll notice is this does have a scandy portion on here, so you can do some woodwork. It has a lot of belly on it. Look at that belly, good belly for skinning. It has a very fine point. It has one of the finest points available on a WC knife. You can look at some of my previous videos and show how I use that point to get in and pop joints and tendons and to reach down and do some very detailed work. This is an awesome, awesome skinning knife right here. If I were going to choose one blade for a general purpose skinner, it's going to be that Junior Woodsman. Awesome, awesome knife. Can't say enough good about it. Now let's take a look at the Master Bushman. Very different design. It's also got that scandy portion right there, that cutout. But as you can see, it has the tooth. You can see that right there. You see the Junior Woodsman does not have that tooth. Now, this produces a very, very aggressive cut when you're working with wood, cardboard, or anything like that. Now, the way I explain the tooth or compare the tooth, think of it as a one-section serration. Okay, everybody's used a serrated blade, right? And you know that if you're doing skinning or meat work, a serrated blade is probably not what you want. But if you're working with rope, cord, boxes, carpet, stuff like that, hard material to cut, rough use, a serrated blade is great. Think of this as a one-tooth serration. It really is a super thing to have when you're working with wood and anything other than meat. I love that tooth. That tooth is critical for me. Now you can also see this is a very thick stock knife right here. Very thick, very durable. This is a hard use blade, and you can see how thick that tip is compared to the Junior Woodsman. And it's got a not quite totally flat, but almost flat saber grind right here. This knife is my go-to wood knife. What I mean by that, if I'm not going hunting, if I'm not going trapping, if I'm going out in the woods and I know I'm going to be working with wood, this is the knife that's on my hip. This does an incredible job as a hard use wood knife. Now, the latest in this series, or not in this series, but in this size, is the Ridge Runner Blades XXX. This is a first run right here. You can see it's got the scandy portion. It's got that tooth that I love for hard use. But instead of being a super thick blade, this has got some belly on it for skinning, and it's got a nice thick tip. So this could be used as a self-defense knife for stabbing or thrusting. That tip is strong enough to use for drilling if you were doing some woodwork. It's got enough belly on it and a high saber grind to be pretty good with skinning. So what is the verdict on this blade? Where does this XXX fit in? And to me, it fits in right in between a dedicated skinner, and a dedicated bushcraft blade. A lot of times, if you think back to high school when they had awards in sports or whatever, you had a best all-around award, sort of a Swiss Army knife type of award. To me, that's what this XXX is. This is a best all-round knife. If I were in the woods and I needed to do some bushcraft tasks, whittle tent pegs, cut hooks, drill holes or something, this knife would do it. It's got that very aggressive tooth on it. It's got the good Scandi grind. If I needed to take apart any animal up to the size of a southern whitetail, I would not hesitate to use this knife. It's got some belly on it. It's going to skin. Just a good general purpose all around blade. I would not feel undergunned going hunting with this. I would not feel undergunned going trapping with that, and I would not feel undergunned being out in the woods and needing to do some woodwork. But if I know I'm going trapping or hunting, that's the blade that I'm going to take right there. If I know I'm going to be fooling with meat, because I don't need that tooth, it's got plenty of belly, it's got that fine point. If I know that I'm not going to be cutting up rabbits, squirrels, or anything like that, if I'm just going camping in the off season, this right here is the blade that I'm going to take, hard use blade. Love this knife. So that's my view on these three. Now let's take a look at the Nessie and the bigger knife. Okay, let's take a look at those and I'll share my thoughts with you as well. All right, let's take a look at these two. These are kind of in a class by themselves here. Two very different knives. We've got the Master Woodsman here, and this is a big knife. Now, if you'll notice, I am not a generally speaking, I'm not a big knife guy. And to me, this is a big knife. So this is probably the least used WC knife that I have, but it remains in my collection because it's a very valuable knife. You notice in the previous segment I talked about whitetails and I mentioned southern whitetails. That's because our deer down here are smaller than some of those deer that you guys up north have. You know, some of those deer up north are like, it's like skinning a horse. Those things are huge, whereas our deer are a little bit smaller. So to me, this would be a little bit too big for a southern whitetail. Now, I know a lot of guys like big knives. A lot of guys use them. It's just not for me. But I keep this knife because this would be a great knife to use on bear, elk, moose, or those big northern whitetail. A great big butcher knife here. This is razor sharp, handles well in the hand, but it's this to me is reserved for use on big game. So what about the little Nessie? Okay, the Nessie is, it doesn't have, that cutout in it. It doesn't have the hook. The handle is not quite as thick or as wide as on the other blades, but I really have come to like this knife. This is my EDC knife. If I go, like this morning, I had to go by Home Depot. I had to get some gravel, had to get some sand and some other things. This is the knife that rides on my hip when I'm in suburbia or in an urban location. I use this for opening boxes, cutting up bags, basically any chore that I need to pull a knife out for. Instead of a Spyderco type clip-it pocket knife, this knife gets the call. And it's very lightweight, it's thin, so it's very easy to carry as far as an EDC knife. You don't have a big fixed blade flapping around on your belt, just a great knife. If I were in the woods, let's say I had to step out of my truck, I have no problem using this for basic woodcraft. I would have no problem using this knife for anything up to a southern whitetail, squirrel, rabbit, coon, beaver. You can check out the video where I skinned a beaver with it, all the way up to southern whitetail. So, absolutely nothing wrong with this blade. It's just a very light, very trim, very handy knife, and this is basically my EDC fixed blade, whereas that is basically something that I keep in case I need it for big game or a big task. And the final thing I want to touch on are sheaths. Okay, when you have a nice knife, you want a nice sheath. Now, I'm going to do another video on this, but basically I'm down to two different makers when it comes to knives. One is WC Knives, and one is knives made by Muskrat Man. I'm going to do a separate video on Muskrat Man's meat blades. Great stuff, super good stuff. I love his blades. But also, when it comes to sheaths, I have basically two sheaths that I'm down to now. One is, this one is made by Muskrat Man, who makes some of my meat blades, and I do like a full flap total protection sheath. A lot of people don't like these, but you know, when you're out trapping and slipping and sliding in the mud and all of that, I have no problem using a sheath like this. I like that extra protection of the flap. A lot of guys don't, but I have come to value it over time. So I really like his style full flap sheath. The other sheath maker that I have come to be impressed with is Stitched Gear Outfitters. And this is one of their vertical sheaths. They make a lot of different types. It's got a dangler attachment on it. You can see that's the Stitched Gear Outfitter there. And I believe, let's see, here we go, Possum Hollow. You can see Muskrat Man's mark right there on his. These are very thick leather sheaths, very well made, made in America, and both of these are made very well. They're very thick, very high quality sheaths. Just depends on your personal preference, you know, as far as what you like and what you don't like. But you got to support local. We have to support our American makers. I can't say enough about that. And when you do, you're going to pay a premium for these sheaths. These are not cheap sheaths. You know what? I don't want a cheap sheath. I don't want cheap. I want quality. I want to buy once, cry once. And both of these you can depend on. Very thick leather. And this right here is great full coverage protection for your blade. And I like the extra security on that. So just, you know, it just comes down to personal preference, just like the knives that we just looked at. Which one is the best? It depends on what you're doing, where you're doing it, and what you're doing it on. Same thing with sheaths. But the bottom line is, support your American makers, buy quality, buy it once, cry once, and then enjoy it for the rest of your lives. And both of these sheaths, from what I can tell, are lifetime sheaths, especially when you get to be my age. Well, Izzy the Airedale and I, thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time, won't we, girl? Yes, ma'am.